If all religions claim to be truth, then how can Christianity make that claim and think that it is correct?
Appreciate that question, and it's a question that has the assumption that is very correct. Oftentimes the Christian takes the hit that he or she was a follower of Jesus Christ is the only one who lays claim to exclusivity. That is not true. Gautama Buddha was born a Hindu, and he renounced two of the fundamental doctrines of Hinduism, the authority of the Vedas and the caste system. He could not accept those two, went on his own journey in search of enlightenment, and came, of course, with the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and the ultimate extinguishing of desire in his nirvanic pursuit. So he turned his belief away from the religion of his birth in order to find a different answer. Islam is also exclusivistic in its claim, in all of its precepts and its 5 pillars and so on. What about these contradistinctions? The first thing we need to know is there are distinctions, there are fundamental differences. At best, there are superficial similarities. I often hear the question posed wrongly. They'll say, aren't all religions fundamentally the same and superficially different? No, they are fundamentally different, and at best they are superficially similar. What are the fundamental claims, for example? In Buddhism, the goal is to extinguish hunger, extinguish desire. I remember talking to the first woman monk who was from Thailand to be ordained into the Buddhist priesthood. But Thai Buddhists do not ordain women, so she went to Sri Lanka to be ordained, and she has a PhD in philosophy from McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, and Waterloo, I guess, Ontario, McMaster University there. Got her PhD in philosophy, and she gave me the first interview. We chatted for well over an hour, one-on-one, and I sort of angled into some questions because I didn't want to be too discourteous. And one of the things I said to her is, I hear you're married. And she said, yes. I said, you have children? She said, yes. I said, but you're living in a temple by yourself? She said, yes. I said, do you not see your children? She started crying. She said, I have a car. I said, you have a car? She said, yeah. I said, okay. So she drove herself because she can't allow a man to drive her, she said, so she has to drive herself. And she says, every evening at the end of the day, I try and meet up with one of my children. She said, this is the hardest part of my life. I said, so you are on the journey to extinguishing the desire to be with your children. Is that right? Is that a fair assessment? She kept quiet. And then I said this. I said, the Dalai Lama has as his primary pursuit now the freedom of Tibet. She said, that's right. I said, why does he desire that? She looked at me and she said, we try not to get into these philosophical questions. Let's just say that he chooses to. You take a look at other world religions and see where these 4 questions are dealt with: origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. These 4 questions have to be answered in 2 ways. Follow me, please. Every particular answer has to correspond to truth, either through empirical form of measurement or through the logical reasoning process. And when those 4 answers are put together, they must cohere and not be incoherent. So the 2 tests, correspondence and coherence, I guarantee you, only in the Judeo-Christian worldview will you find these 4 questions answered with corresponding truthfulness and with the coherence of a worldview. Let me take just one example, and I don't say this to slight, but this is a fact and we have to deal with it. I've been invited in many, many Islamic countries, and I have open forums there, and going to go to one of the toughest Islamic countries within the next few weeks. They've hosted me in many parts there, and we've had dialogues. I want to give to you 2 things. In the Quran, it is the only historically claimed document that denies that Jesus Christ was actually crucified or died on the cross. Denies that. The Greek historians say he died on the cross. Roman historians say that. Pagan historians say that. Jewish historians say that, and Christian historians say that. The Islamic, the Quran is the only one that says it appeared to him that he died, but he didn't actually die on the cross. So historically, it is making an affirmation that is really historically untrue. I got into a discussion with Sheikh Hussein of the leading Shiite cleric in Damascus, Syria, a real gentleman. For over 3 hours, we talked with an interpreter between us and an audience listening in. I was allowed to ask him one question about his faith, and he was allowed to ask me one question about mine. There was nothing, no rancor, no adversarial stance, just a perspective and counter-perspective and back and forth. It's the best way to do it, really. At the end of it, Sheikh Hussein looked at me. He was very respectful through the whole time, always referred to me as Professor Zacharias, Professor Zacharias. And then at the end, he looked at me, leaned over, and he said, "You know, Professor, I think the time has come for us in the Islamic world to stop asking if Jesus Christ died and to start asking why." I said to him, "May I quote you on that, sir?" He said, "Yes, you may. I'm hopefully going to go there before long, and I hope we can meet up again." Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. The Judeo-Christian worldview is not the only one that claims exclusivity, but it's the only one that takes those 4 questions with corresponding answers that are truthful and coherent answers that stand the test of time. And the ultimate answer of the resurrection from the dead that gives you hope and meaning. I see. Most psychiatrists assiduously avoid the word evil, contending that using the word evil would precipitate a dangerous slide from clinical to moral judgment. They don't like to use evil because it would be a slide from mere clinician's work to a moral pronouncement on somebody. The person writing this, I think this is in the New York Times, so it shouldn't surprise you. Okay, listen to what he says. The person writing this didn't realize that this was a moral judgment itself. That very pronouncement is a moral judgment, that we don't want to slide into a moral framework. Rather keep it in a medical framework than you pop a pill for somebody who is evil. Why call him or her evil? But then he goes on to say this, and that could end up people putting on death row unnecessarily. Is that not a moral judgment? What on earth? You talk about a one-ended stick. There's no such thing. They are using moral categories to debunk moral categories because moral categories would be judgmental, so we keep it clinical rather than moral, all along saying because we don't want to end up doing anything immoral. I mean, this wreaks havoc with reason. What do you do with such things? So you've got evil, injustice, violence. And I think when you look at the Judeo-Christian worldview, it's the only one that even begins to answer it. I'll have to race through it. Number 1, in chapter 2 and verse 18 onwards, of what value is an idol, since a man has carved it, or an image that teaches lies? For he who makes it trusts in his own creation. He makes idols that cannot speak. Woe to him who says to wood, come to life, or to lifeless stone, wake up. Can it give guidance? It is covered with gold and silver. There is no breath in it, but the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. The number 1 answer is the actuality of God in distinction to atheism. The reason you're raising these questions, Habakkuk, is because you have moral reasoning within you. And I am telling you, if you were to raise these questions to a lifeless stone or to an idol, you're wasting your breath. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. Somebody once asked me, what are going to be your first words when you see God? I said, I'm going to be absolutely silent because I'll be terrified at what his words are first going to be to me. I'm nowhere near concerned about what I'm going to say to him. I am truly concerned about what he's going to say to me. And if I were to hear from him the words, well done, what do you say? The divine accolade that everyone longs for and dreams for. You see, what makes America unique, which our naturalists and secularists hate to recognize, but even Gertrude Himmelfarb, professor of ethical history and so on, University of Columbia, in her book Roads to Modernity, makes this comment. She said, the difference between the United States and Great Britain on the one side and Europe on the other side is this. Listen carefully. For the European French philosophers and the German philosophers and all of the great Spanish thinkers and all, for the Europeans, reasoning was supreme. Reasoning, and hence René Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Logically, he should really have said, I think, therefore thinking exists. But he couldn't stop from going to the personhood. For the Europeans, it was reasoning, thinking. For the Americans and the English, says Gertrude Himmelfarb, it was not reasoning that was foundational. Hear this now. It was moral reasoning. Moral reasoning, that there is an absolute right, there is an absolute wrong, and it is all based on that transcendent moral reality of the actuality of God. Ladies and gentlemen, if God doesn't exist, these very questions are irrational because they are moral questions. And moral reasoning is ultimately anchored in a moral, personal, absolute first cause. We draw our morality not from abstract thinking, but from the very person of God. I have to. Beside the debris of these solemn supermen and self-styled imperial diplomatists stands the gigantic figure of one person, because of whom, by whom, in whom, and through whom alone mankind might still have peace, the person of Jesus Christ. Ladies and gentlemen, surrender to him. Love him, follow him, serve him, live for him, and take his message wherever you go, because these solemn supermen and imperial diplomatists will someday litter some desert terrain or some museum somewhere. They can dance all they want on the grave of Jesus. He's not there. He rose again. He describes your heart. He provides for your malady. He equips you in suffering. He puts meaning into every moment in history, and he conquers death through the resurrection from the grave. Those are only a handful of thoughts. There's a lot more that I could say. God bless you.